Hello and welcome to the 13th video in this beginner series programming a tile puzzle game on the iPad. So in this video we're going to start our dealing with the dragging of the tiles and detecting of the touches from the user or the player. The first thing I'd like you to do is to put some new constants in. I've added 4 constants in here which are upper limit x, upper limit y, lower limit y, lower limit x, and the reason these are here are these are basically the bounds x and y, upper and lower, that contain our tiles. So not the board but the actual tiles, so this is taking off the tile border. And we're going to use this to detect whether when the user touches the screen, whether they've actually touched inside our area containing the tiles, and more importantly whether they've then dragged their finger outside this area, so they're trying to drag a tile just completely off the board. So once you've got these constants in, you need to add in a function here which I've already added because it's very simple, called out of board, returning a boolean. It receives a point that was touched, and it just tests whether the y and the x of this point are outside those defined limits. If they are, it returns yes to say we're out of the board. If they're not, it returns no. Good. So when we think in the application itself about the tile situation and the user touching, we already know how to get the square of the tile the user has touched, and now we need to think how we're going to the gameplay is going to work. So the user is going to touch, hold their finger down and then drag in a direction. And if they drag in a direction that gets an empty square, then we'll make an animation and animate the tile moving from one square to the other, and at the same time stop receiving more drag input coordinates. The user could, however, drag the tile with their finger off the screen, so we need something to say, okay, if that's happened, then stop receiving and processing the drag coordinates. They could also just touch off the screen to start with and then drag onto the tile board. So if the touch is outside the board, we'll say, okay, we'll ignore this touch. So it's quite simple stuff, so let's go for implementing it now. So the first thing we need in gamePlayerLayer.h, we need a boolean that we'll call drag cancelled. And this will just tell us whether we should be used to say whether we're processing any input or not. In getSquareFromPoint, I've removed the printboard line because there was too much stuff coming to the console. And now let's go down to here. And I've already got a line in here saying that if we're out of board at the location touched when the finger went down, then log to the screen we're out of board and return no, which basically says we're not going to process this touch. But if we are in the board, then we can say integer square from, so the square we started from, the square we touched, equals the get square from point. Now we know that this returns -1 if it's still not a square, so if they've touched right between two squares or something. So we can say if square from equals -1, then also we will take this code from here and copy it underneath, and we'll say no square -1, so we know where the user has then touched and not received the touch. But assuming that the touch was, well, not assuming, we know now that the touch on the tile was okay because we have a square, so we'll set drag cancelled equal to no. It's not cancelled because we're now receiving a drag. So let's now move down to touch moved and have a look what we have there. Well, the first thing we have to say here is that if a drag has been cancelled because we've gone off the board or into an illegal square or whatever, then we need to just simply return without doing any more processing. So I'm just going to copy in here. So that sets up if the drag is cancelled, we don't do anything with our locations that we've dragged to. The next thing we need to say is that if we've actually dragged outside the board, then we also need to cancel the drag. So we'll paste in here that if we're out of the board for this touch location, then touch moved out of board, and we'll cancel the drag, which means the next point we get, drag is cancelled and we no longer start processing these coordinates. Okay, so let's now save that and let's have a quick look at how that looks then when we're actually running things on the application. So I'll just stop this application running here before I run it then, and now I'll just go up to the top left in Xcode and click Run. Come back to our application, and here's the console. So if I now click here, you can see that it's now telling us that we've clicked out of board. Here I've now clicked a square, but I'm not dragging, I've clicked a square, so we're okay. I've got here no square, -1, because I clicked right between the squares here. And now let's click a square and drag. So if I click here and now drag and keep going to the right, and now you can see that it's off board. And now it's detecting each of the drag points as a new click each time and saying we also have no square in this way. So in this way we can't actually cause any problems with the dragging. If I try and click outside and drag inside, well, we just started out of board, so it's ignoring this touch anyway. So good, that looks like we're dealing with the dragging in and outside the board okay. So thanks very much for watching. Comments, questions, criticisms welcome as always on YouTube.